Hello everyone, my name is Lisa, and I never imagined my life would turn out this way. I grew up in what I thought was a typical family, at least it was normal to us. My father was always busy with his cabinetry business, and my mother took care of the house. We weren't wealthy, but we were comfortable. Dad didn't talk much about work at home. He would come in late, give Mom a quick kiss, ask me how school was, and that was it. I didn't mind. I was happy in my own little world. I remember the day everything changed. I was 23, just out of college, and unsure about what to do with my life. One afternoon, I overheard Dad on the phone. He sounded tense. "No, absolutely not. I won't let you take over my company. I've worked too hard for this," he said firmly. I shouldn't have listened in, but I couldn't help it. My stomach twisted as I realized Dad's company was in trouble. Why hadn't he said anything? That night at dinner, I watched him closely. He seemed normal, joking with Mom about her slightly burnt casserole. But I noticed the worry lines etched around his eyes and how his smile didn't quite reach them. I knew I had to do something, but I had no idea where to start. I didn't know the first thing about business, but I couldn't sit by and watch our family's livelihood crumble. The next day, I did some digging. It wasn't hard to find out who was trying to take over Dad's company, a powerful businessman named Henry Caldwell. His office wasn't far from our house. When I showed up and asked to see Mr. Caldwell, the receptionist gave me a skeptical look. "Do you have an appointment?" she asked, raising an eyebrow. "No, but it's important. Please, just 15 minutes, I begged. She must have felt sorry for me because, after a quick phone call, she motioned me toward the elevator. "Top floor," she said. The ride up felt like an eternity. When the doors finally opened, I found myself face to face with Henry Caldwell. He was older than I expected, with gray hair and piercing eyes. "Well, well," he said, sizing me up. "What do we have here?" I swallowed hard. "Mr. Caldwell, I'm Lisa Andrews. I'm here about my father's company, Andrews Cabinetry." His eyebrows shot up. "Andrew's daughter, this is unexpected. Come in, let's talk." I followed him into his office, trying not to be distracted by the stunning view. He settled behind his large desk and motioned for me to sit. "So, Miss Andrews, what can I do for you?" I took a deep breath. "Please, don't take over my father's company. It means everything to him. There must be another way." Caldwell leaned back in his chair, studying me for a moment. "Interesting," he said slowly. "I have a deal for you, Miss Andrews. I'll leave your father's company alone if you agree to marry my son." I stared at him, thinking I must have heard wrong. "Excuse me?" "You heard me. Marry my son and help him mature a bit. Do that, and your father's company is safe." I left Caldwell's office in a daze. Marry his son? Was he insane? But the more I thought about it, the more I realized I didn't have many options. It was either this or watch my father's life's work unravel. The next day, I found myself back in that intimidating office. Caldwell was waiting, a smug smile on his face. "So, Miss Andrews, have you made your decision?" I took a deep breath. "Yes, I'll do it. I'll marry your son." Caldwell clapped his hands together. "Excellent. Let me introduce you two, shall we?" Before I knew it, I was being led into another room, and there he was, Caldwell's son. I had expected a stiff, serious businessman, but the man who stood up to greet me was nothing like that. He was tall, with messy dark hair and a lopsided smile. "Hi," he said, extending his hand. "I'm Daniel. You must be Lisa." I shook his hand, trying to hide my surprise. "Yeah, that's me." Daniel's father cleared his throat. "I'll leave you two to get acquainted." As soon as the door closed behind him, Daniel's relaxed attitude shifted. He ran a hand through his hair, looking uncomfortable. "Look, I'm sorry about this," he said. "My dad? He's got some pretty old-fashioned ideas." I shrugged, trying to act like it was no big deal. "It's fine. We're both adults, right? We can handle this." Daniel laughed, but it sounded forced. "Yeah, sure. Just a casual arranged marriage, no big deal. Over the next few weeks, Daniel and I started seeing each other, if you could call it dating. We went out to dinner, watched movies, did the usual things, but there was always this underlying awkwardness. We both knew this wasn't real, no matter how much we tried to pretend. 5 months after that fateful meeting in Caldwell's office, I found myself walking down the aisle. My dad looked so proud, so happy. He had no idea about the deal I had made to save his company. As I said my vows, I looked into Daniel's eyes. There wasn't any real love there, but there was friendship, and maybe that could be enough. The reception was a blur of congratulations and champagne. At one point, Daniel's mother, Evelyn, cornered me with a tight smile. "Welcome to the family, dear," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "I do hope you'll make Daniel happy." I forced a smile. "I'll certainly try, Mrs. Caldwell." As we left for our honeymoon, I caught a glimpse of my father-in-law. He was beaming, clearly pleased with himself. A wave of anger surged through me. This was all just a game to him. The first few years of our marriage were interesting, to say the least. Daniel and I settled into a routine. We lived in a nice house, thanks to his father's money, but it felt more like we were roommates than husband and wife. I tried my best to be a positive influence on Daniel, and slowly, I began to see changes in him. He started spending less time with his wild friends and more time at the office with his father. I could see the pride in Caldwell's eyes when Daniel began taking the business seriously. It made me feel like maybe this whole arrangement hadn't been for nothing. Evelyn, on the other hand, was a different story. She never said anything outright, but I could feel her disapproval. She would purse her lips when I spoke or offer backhanded compliments like, "Oh, Lisa, that dress is interesting. So bold of you to wear something like that." I would grit my teeth and smile. "Thank you, Mrs. Caldwell." Despite the challenges, I held on to hope. Maybe, just maybe, Daniel and I could grow to love each other. Maybe having kids would change things. But life had other plans. It was a crisp autumn day when we received the news. Daniel and I sat in the doctor's office, the silence between us heavy. "I'm sorry," the doctor said gently, "but the tests show that you, Mr. Caldwell, are unable to father children." The words hit me like a punch. No children. The one thing I had been holding on to, the one thing that might have brought us closer, was now impossible. That night, as I lay awake, I thought about my own parents. Dad's business had flourished since my marriage to Daniel. He had even managed to double his revenue. I was genuinely happy for him, but I couldn't help feeling lost. I wanted to work, to have a purpose beyond just being Daniel's wife. But when I brought it up to him, his response was quick and dismissive. "Work? Why would you need to work? We have more than enough money," he said, brushing me off. "It's not about the money, Daniel. I want to do something meaningful," I replied. He shook his head. "In our circle, wives don't work. They do charity. Why don't you start a foundation or something?" And so the Lisa Caldwell Foundation for Children with Cancer was born. It wasn't what I had envisioned for myself, but it gave me a sense of purpose. I threw myself into the work, organizing fundraisers, visiting hospitals, doing whatever I could to help. Daniel didn't seem to care much about my new passion. In fact, he didn't seem to care much about anything I did anymore. We were living parallel lives, sharing the same space but rarely connecting. Years passed, 8 to be exact, and then everything changed again. Daniel's father died suddenly of a heart attack. Just like that, Daniel was thrust into the role of CDO. I tried to be supportive, but I could see him struggling under the weight of his new responsibilities. 3 years later, we received more bad news. Evelyn had cancer. "We should move her to a care facility," Daniel said, his voice detached. "They can take better care of her there." But his mother refused. "I will die in my own home," she declared, her chin lifted defiantly. So, drawing on my experience with the Cancer Foundation, I took charge of her care. I hired nurses, coordinated treatments, and spent hours by her bedside. To my surprise, Evelyn's attitude toward me began to soften. One day, as I was adjusting her pillows, she caught my hand. "You're a good woman, Lisa," she said softly. "I'm sorry I didn't see it sooner." Tears welled up in my eyes. "Thank you, Mrs. Caldwell." 6 years passed since Daniel took over his father's company. I wish I could say things got better, but the truth was far from it. Daniel's behavior became more erratic. He was drinking more, coming home at odd hours, and snapping at me over the smallest things. One day, I received a call from Daniel's assistant. "Mrs. Caldwell, I'm sorry to bother you, but Mr. Caldwell hasn't been to the office in days. Is everything all right?" When Daniel finally stumbled home that night, reeking of alcohol, I confronted him. "Daniel, what's going on? Your assistant called. You haven't been to work." He laughed bitterly. "Work? What's the point? The company's going under anyway. Dear old Dad left me a sinking ship, and I couldn't keep it afloat." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. All those years of hard work, gone, and Daniel seemed almost relieved. Desperate to save something, I reached out to my father. Even though he was semi-retired, he agreed to help. He offered Daniel a position as his deputy, hoping to guide him back to success. But Daniel's heart wasn't in it. He showed up late, left early, and did the bare minimum. I watched helplessly as my father's sales began to drop. I knew I had to have a serious talk with Daniel. One night, after he'd had a few drinks, I approached him. "Daniel, we need to talk about work. You're barely showing up, and my father's company is suffering because of you." Daniel's face twisted with anger. "Oh, so now it's my fault? I never wanted this, Lisa, any of it." "What are you talking about?" I asked, confused. He laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "This life, this marriage. I'm just waiting for Mom to pass away so I can sell her house and get out of here." I stared at him, horrified. "How can you say that? Your mother is dying, and all you care about is her money." "Don't act all high and mighty," he spat. "We both know this marriage is a sham. You're just as eager to get out as I am." Disgusted, I turned to leave the room. As I opened the door, I came face to face with Evelyn. The look on her face told me she had heard everything. For a moment, we just stared at each other. Then, silently, she reached out and squeezed my hand. In that gesture, I felt her gratitude, her understanding, and her sorrow. The day I got the call about my parents' plane crash, my world shattered. Mom and Dad were gone in an instant. Their small plane to Aspen, Colorado, meant to be a second honeymoon, became their final journey. I needed support, someone to lean on, but Daniel was nowhere to be found. My own husband didn't even bother to show up at the funeral. As I stood there, watching my parents' caskets being lowered into the ground, I felt more alone than ever. After the funeral, anger began to replace my sorrow. How dare he? How could he abandon me when I needed him most? Fueled by this new fury, I marched into my father's company, our company now, I supposed. The sight that greeted me when I entered Dad's old office made my blood boil. There was Daniel, lounging in Dad's chair like he owned the place, barking orders like some conquering hero. "Daniel," I said, my voice tight with barely contained rage, "we need to talk." He looked up, his face full of annoyance. "What is it now, Lisa? Can't you see I'm busy?" I snapped. "You couldn't even be bothered to come to my parents' funeral." Daniel rolled his eyes. "Oh, here we go with the lecturing again. You know what, Lisa? You're always nagging, always pushing. Well, I'm done with it, and I'm done with you." I stared at him, shocked. Then I noticed something change in his eyes. A cold, calculating look replaced the anger. "You know, Lisa," he said, his voice suddenly calm, "this company is worth about $30 million. And guess what? As deputy director, it's all mine now." My heart sank. "What are you talking about?" He leaned back in the chair, Dad's chair, with a smug smile. I have all the passwords, access to all the accounts. I'm in charge now, and there's nothing you can do about it. You can't do this, I stammered, my voice shaking. You've already ruined your father's company. I won't let you do the same to my father's legacy. Daniel laughed, a cold, harsh sound. Oh, I'm not going to run it. I'm going to sell it, piece by piece, and then I'm going to live like a king. Before I could stop him, he turned to the computer. I watched in horror as he transferred a large sum from the company account to his personal one. There, he said, turning back to me. That should keep me comfortable for a while. Then, as if this whole thing was just a minor inconvenience, he reached into his desk drawer and pulled out a stack of papers. He tossed them at me casually. Oh, and here, divorce papers. I think it's time we ended this farce, don't you? I caught the papers reflexively, my mind reeling. This couldn't be happening. It was too much, too fast. My parents were dead, my marriage was over, and my father's company was being stolen right in front of me. I left the office in a daze, clutching the divorce papers in my hand. But as I walked, something inside me shifted. I had spent years bending to Daniel's will, to his father's manipulations. No more. It was time to fight back. With renewed determination, I headed straight to my father's lawyer's office. Mr. Thompson had been Dad's friend and confidant for years. If anyone could help me, it would be him. Lisa, Mr. Thompson said, rising to greet me as I entered his office. I'm so sorry about your parents. How are you holding up? I collapsed into the chair across from him, the events of the day spilling out in a rush. Mr. Thompson listened patiently, his expression growing grimmer by the minute. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair with a small smile. Lisa, I think it's time I shared something with you. Your father made some changes to his will just before the accident. As he read the will, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. The company, it was mine, all mine. Dad had left it to me, not Daniel, but there was more. Mr. Thompson looked up from the papers, his eyes twinkling. There's something else you should know. Your father dismissed Daniel 1 week before his death, fired him outright. I couldn't help it. I laughed. A real, genuine laugh for the first time in what felt like forever. So all those orders Daniel had been giving were completely meaningless. Mr. Thompson nodded, then pulled out an envelope. There's one more thing, a letter from your father. With shaking hands, I opened it. Dad's familiar handwriting blurred as tears filled my eyes. My dearest Lisa, it began. If you're reading this, it means I'm gone. I'm sorry for leaving you like this, but I hope I've left you with the tools to build the life you deserve. The company is yours now, and Lisa, it's time to let go of Daniel. You've given enough of yourself to that marriage. It's time to live for you. I love you, sweetheart. Make me proud. I looked up at Mr. Thompson, wiping my eyes. Do you have a pen? Without a word, he handed me one. I signed the divorce papers Daniel had given me, feeling lighter with each stroke of the pen. Can you file these? I asked, handing them back. I want this done as quickly as possible. Mr. Thompson nodded. Consider it done. As I left his office, I felt free for the first time in years, maybe for the first time ever. I was in control of my own life. No more Daniel, no more Caldwell pulling my strings. On impulse, I pulled out my phone and called Samantha, my best friend from the foundation. Sam, it's Lisa. Want to meet for coffee? I've got some news. An hour later, we were seated in our favorite cafe, lats in hand. So, Sam said, eyeing me curiously, what's this big news? I took a deep breath, then let it all out. Daniel, the company, the divorce. Sam listened, her eyes widening. When I finished, she reached across the table and squeezed my hand. Girl, you're free, and now you're the boss. I couldn't help but smile at her enthusiasm. I don't know, Sam. Can I really run a company? I asked, feeling uncertain. She gave me a stern look. Are you kidding me, Lisa? You've been running that charity foundation like a pro for years. You're smart, you're organized, and you actually care about people, you're going to be an amazing CEO. After my talk with Sam, I felt more confident. It was time to face reality and get my things from Daniel's house. I never really thought of it as my home, and now I understood why. When I arrived, I found Evelyn in the living room. She looked tired, worn out from her battle with cancer. "Evelyn," I said gently, "I'm here to get my things. Daniel and we're getting divorced." To my surprise, her eyes filled with tears. "Lisa, I know I haven't always been kind to you, but you've been so good to me. Would you consider taking me with you?" I was stunned. "You want to come with me?" Before she could answer, the front door slammed open. Daniel stormed in, his face red with anger. "You," he shouted, pointing at me. "What the hell did you do?" "The company accounts are blocked. I can't access the money." I straightened up, looking him in the eye. "That money isn't yours, Daniel. It never was. And by the way, my father fired you 3 weeks ago. You have no claim to the company. I've already told security not to let you into the building." Daniel's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. Then he noticed his mother packing a suitcase. "Mom, what are you doing?" Evelyn looked at her son, her expression a mix of sadness and determination. "I'm going with Lisa." "I'm sorry, Daniel, but you've proven to be unreliable." Daniel's face turned an even deeper shade of red. "Unreliable? Me? This is all your fault. You raised me to be this way, with your coddling and your expectations." He turned to me, his voice full of venom. "Fine. Get out, both of you. I don't need either of you." I felt a wave of pity for him. This angry, bitter man was a far cry from the charming, if irresponsible, guy I had married. But I couldn't let that sway me, not anymore. "Come on, Evelyn," I said softly. "Let's get your things." As we packed, Daniel continued to rant and rave, hurling insults and blame, but we tuned him out, focusing on what we needed to do. The drive to my parents' house was quiet. Evelyn dozed in the passenger seat, the stress of the day taking its toll. As we pulled up to the house, a lump formed in my throat. It felt strange coming here without Mom and Dad. "We're here," I whispered. I gently woke Evelyn and helped her inside, leading her to my parents' parlor room. It felt right, somehow, to give her that space. "Are you sure?" Evelyn asked, her eyes wide as she looked around the room. I nodded, swallowing past the lump in my throat. "Yes, I think they would have wanted it this way." As I helped Evelyn settle in, I felt a mix of emotions: grief for my parents, relief at being free from Daniel, and uncertainty about the future. But beneath it all, there was a glimmer of hope. Taking over Dad's company felt like jumping into the deep end of a pool without knowing how to swim. Those first few months were filled with meetings, financial reports, and sleepless nights. But I was determined to make it work. I hired Andrew, a brilliant business consultant, as my right-hand man. He patiently guided me through the complexities of running a multi-million-dollar company. "You've got good instincts, Lisa," he'd say. "Trust them." Slowly but surely, I found my footing. 5 months in, I wasn't just getting by, I was thriving. The company's performance began to improve, and I felt a surge of pride, knowing Dad would have been pleased. Through it all, I never neglected the Cancer Foundation. If anything, my work there became even more important to me. It was a connection to my past and a guiding light for my future. Evelyn's condition worsened over time, and I devoted myself to her care, determined to make her final days as comfortable as possible. We grew close during those 3 years, healing old wounds and forming a bond I never thought possible. The day she passed, I held her hand and whispered, "Thank you for everything, Evelyn." She squeezed my hand weakly, a small smile on her face, before slipping away peacefully. I organized the funeral myself, making sure everything was just right. Daniel didn't show up. I wasn't surprised, but it still hurt to see how far he had fallen. A few weeks after the funeral, I received a call from Mr. Thompson. "Lisa, there's something you need to see. Can you come to my office?" When I arrived, I was shocked to see Daniel there, a young blonde hanging on his arm. He smirked at me. "Well, if it isn't the little CEO. Don't worry, I'm just here to collect my inheritance." Mom and I might have had our differences, but blood is thicker than water, right? I held back my words, waiting for Mr. Thompson to speak. The lawyer cleared his throat and began reading Evelyn's will. As he spoke, I watched Daniel's smug expression turn to disbelief, then to anger. "And so, I leave my house and all my savings to Lisa Andrews, with the stipulation that the money be donated to the Cancer Foundation she so passionately supports." Tears filled my eyes as Evelyn's final act of kindness overwhelmed me. Daniel exploded. "This is a joke. She manipulated Mom. She's a fraud, a gold digger. She ruined my life, and now she's stealing my inheritance." His girlfriend, looking confused, stepped away from him. "You said we'd be set for life with this money. I'm out of here," she stormed out, leaving Daniel sputtering in disbelief. As I left the office, I could hear Daniel's angry rants fade behind me. I felt light, free. Evelyn's gift wasn't just about the money. It was validation. She had seen me, truly seen me.